All right. Welcome, everybody. Again, thank you so much for joining us. My name is Amy Artzer, and I am the Community Partnerships Manager for Girl Scouts of Colorado. I'm so happy that you're all joining us today with the Colorado Women's Hall of Fame and the League of Women Voters of Colorado to learn about the women's suffrage movement and the centennial of this moment in history. We have some wonderful presenters with us today, but I just will remind everybody that our chat box is closed for the moment, but anything that you enter into the chat box, I will be able to see. So if you're having any trouble with audio or seeing anything, please feel free to enter anything in there. A little later on, we will go into breakout sessions and you can unmute yourselves at that time. Additionally, at the very end, we'll have an open Q&A and we'll use the chat box to take those questions for our amazing presenters to answer for you. So keep an eye on the chat box, follow along with us. We're very, very happy to have you today. And in true Girl Scout fashion, let's kick everything off with the Girl Scout Promise and Law. So please follow along from home. On my honor, I will try to serve God and my country, to help people at all times, and to live by the Girl Scout law. Now the Girl Scout law. I will do my best to be honest and fair, friendly and helpful, considerate and caring, courageous and strong, and responsible for what I say and do, and to respect myself and others, respect authority, use resources wisely, make the world a better place, and be a sister to everyone. Well done. Thank you. Okay, so we have some fantastic presenters with us here today. First, we have Beth Barela, who's the Executive Director of the Colorado Women's Hall of Fame. ML Hanson, who is actually the founder of the Colorado Women's Hall of Fame and a Girl Scout Woman of Distinction. Beth Hendrix, who is the Executive Director of the League of Women Voters of Colorado. Tietjen, who is an inductee of the Colorado Women's Hall of Fame and the Colorado Authors Hall of Fame, and who's also a Girl Scout Woman of Distinction. And Andrea Wilkins, who is the Legislative Liaison for the League of Women Voters of Colorado. So thank you all to each of these women for joining us today. I know they're gonna let us know about some amazing history and what's going on in the world today, and then you'll get a chance to actually ask them your questions live. So I want to remind everybody that by participating today, you are doing two things. So you are earning your Colorado Women's Hall of Fame patch by completing a Colorado Women's Hall of Fame scavenger hunt, learning about inductees, and attending a Colorado Women's Hall of Fame event. So well done. You can purchase this patch online through our shop online. Our shop is not open in person quite yet, but you can order things online and they'll ship directly to you. And then you are also completing the Discover portion of your Girl Scout Suffrage Centennial patch. So this is a patch straight from GSUSA. It just came out last week, I think it was. And there are 3 parts: Discover, Connect, and Take Action. And through participating today, you'll complete the Discover portion of it by finding out why it's important to vote, learning about women's first time voting, and learning about why some people were maybe opposed to women voting. I will send out a follow-up email after today with some links to more information about these patches, especially for the Girl Scouts of the USA patch, so you can go learn about the Connect and Take Action pieces. So very exciting stuff. And if you are interested in learning more, you can finish earning your patch from GSUSA. And then there's also a Girl Scout 19th Amendment Ranger patch through the National Park Service. I'll include a link to that as well in a follow-up email, and you can explore all the other amazing resources that are out there on our Suffrage Centennial blog post. Additionally, if you know any younger Girl Scouts who are out there, because this session is for cadets, seniors, and ambassadors, we do have a session just for daisies, brownies, and juniors on Friday, August 14th, and many girls are welcome to sign up for that as well, and we will also post that recording. So I'm going to turn things over now to Beth Barela from the Colorado Women's Hall of Fame. And let me see, I will to unmute, and she's going to share our screen and take it away. Oh, I'm sorry, everybody. I made a little mistake here. We're actually turning things over to Beth Hendrix, not Beth Barela. Beth Hendrix from the Colorado League of Women Voters.
Actually, Amy, I think I'm going to take this part of the presentation, and Beth will be speaking to the current work of the League.
Wonderful. Welcome, Andrea. My apologies. Thank
Oh,
you.
no problem.
Take it away. So you should be able to share your screen, and I'm going to go ahead and put myself on mute.
Okay, let me see if I can make all the technology work. Let's hope. Okay, hopefully you can all see my screen in the slideshow format.
We can see your screen.
Perfect. Okay,
Thank you so much, Andrea. Sorry about that, everybody.
Oh, no problem. And I have recently tried to switch myself to a 2-monitor system. And so kind of looking at different places and trying to coordinate my mouse. So bear with me if I happen to get lost in the presentation. All right, well, to kick things off, I just want to say welcome and thank you all for participating in today's event celebrating the 100th anniversary of women's right to vote. My name is Andrea Wilkins, and I'm the Legislative Liaison with the League of Women Voters of Colorado. All of the presenters have been asked to share their first memory of voting. And I just wanted to touch on that briefly and share my experience there. I actually have less memory of voting for the first time than I do participating in the campaign and hearing the campaign events leading up to the 1992 election. I was a senior in high school at the time. I remember reading pretty extensively about the candidates, and it was the first inclination that I had that I would probably one day become a political junkie, which has been true to this day. But I got really interested in the candidates and went to a couple of campaign events to see Bill Clinton speak in person near my college campus. Hillary Clinton came with him. I found her particularly interesting because at the time she was a pretty unique first lady, or would-be first lady. And so it led to me kind of following her career through her own run for president. So I actually, the campaign has stronger memories for me as opposed to voting itself, but it's not to, underscore or underplay the importance of voting, but I found the campaign events to be very exciting. So that's my earliest memory. Turning to my presentation now, the information that I'm planning to share today is really intended to provide a brief overview of the history of the women's suffrage movement in the US. And by suffrage, we mean the right to vote. It's a word that you don't always hear in everyday conversation, and it kind of sounds like it might mean something other than what it actually does, but it means the right to vote. And when we refer to the suffrage movement, we're referring to the fight for women's right to vote. And this battle was fought by many, women and men alike, who were referred to as suffragists. Today we do have some limited time, so we don't have the ability to really go in depth about each of the individual suffragists, but I do want to make mention of the fact that they are a diverse and impressive group of people made up certainly not only of white women and men, but also Black, Hispanic, Native American activists who work to make our society more just. So I think it's really important to acknowledge that, because historically suffragists of color have not received the recognition that they deserve. I think it's also important to acknowledge that there were some divisions within the suffrage movement, and I'm going to touch on those a little bit further into the presentation. But I want to make mention of the fact that those divisions are there. It's not something we'll delve into too deeply, but there are a few resources listed at the end of the presentation. And I would really encourage you to look into it more, because there were some racial issues at play, there were political issues at play that led to some of these divisions. And I think some of it has a lot of relevance for a lot of the issues that we still struggle to work through, as we hope to shape better public policy. So just to mention about that. And then before we go to the next slide, I do want to make mention of the fact that the colors you see represented on this slide, hopefully they're coming, one of my screens looks purple, the other one looks blue. It's supposed to be purple, white, and gold. And those are colors that are commonly associated with the suffrage movement. The purple symbolized loyalty to the cause, and white was seen as an emblem of purity that symbolized the quality and the purpose of the movement. And the gold tended to symbolize light and life and a torch that guides our purpose. So, you will typically see these colors associated with suffrage celebrations and in historical pictures, that kind of thing. So I wanted to provide a little context why you see those colors. Okay, before we go any further, I want to talk a little bit specifically about the League of Women Voters. It was mentioned that, I work with the League of Women Voters. I'm the legislative liaison, and I just want to provide a little bit of historical context for our organization. The suffrage movement is very dear to the League of Women Voters. Our organization was born out of the suffrage movement and was founded 100 years ago by Carrie Chapman Catt, who was a key leader in the movement. And this all took place during the convention of the National American Woman Suffrage Association in Chicago. This convention was held just 6 months before the 19th Amendment to the US Constitution was ratified. And the League began really in what we refer to as a mighty political experiment that was designed to help women carry out their new responsibility as voters. It really encouraged them to use their power to participate in shaping public policy. And from the beginning, the League has been an activist grassroots organization whose leaders believe that citizens should play a critical role in advocacy. Today, we continue to promote an active and informed participation in government by women and men to ensure that our democracy and governing institutions operate effectively, and to fight for the development of law and policy that reflects our beliefs as an organization. Okay, getting into a little bit of the history of the movement itself. We all know that, we've gathered for this important anniversary. August 26th, just around the corner, marks the 100th anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment, which granted women the right to vote. I want to point out that, when we say they were granted the right to vote, sometimes that kind of sounds like they were given the right to vote, which you probably already have a good sense and we'll talk about. Absolutely not the case. They fought for this right to vote. It was a lengthy battle and a hard one, but, a very, very just cause. So, nothing was handed over lightly. And, it's also to say that social change in our country doesn't happen overnight. It takes a lot of courage and persistence, and this is true whether we're talking about the fight for women's suffrage and the ongoing fight for women's rights today, or the civil rights movement of the 1960s, the fight for marriage equality, or some of the policy changes that we're fighting for today through the Black Lives Matter movement and the push to reform our criminal justice system. So, I think whenever you're trying to push for a more just society, push for large-scale systemic societal change, it's important to keep in mind that it can be a lengthy battle, and persistence really is key, and the suffragists certainly exhibited that quality. The battle for women's suffrage really did take generations, and many of those that were leading the fight didn't actually live to see the 19th Amendment ratified, unfortunately. But it was a cause worth fighting for, and no matter how long it took, they were in it for the long haul. It really was the battle of a lifetime for many of them, and eventually they were successful to all of our benefit today. So I think in that spirit, it's important that we continue the fight for equality and justice today, and really dedicate ourselves to the work that's left to be done, not only for women in politics, but also for so many others who face systemic barriers to full political equity and inclusion in civic life. All right, a little bit more about the steps that actually took place to get to the ratification of the 19th Amendment that we can celebrate today. The seeds of the women's suffrage movement and the initial organizing that really allowed the movement to get off the ground date back to 1840. And this led to the first key event of the movement, which was the first Women's Rights Convention that took place in Seneca Falls, New York in 1848. And it was during this event that the Declaration of Sentiments were presented. This is a document that was written by suffragist Elizabeth Cady Stanton. You can see a picture of her here. And it asserted the equality of women and men and made a call for women's suffrage. The Declaration of Sentiments drew attention to the variety of ways that women were oppressed by the government and patriarchal society. Things like lack of access to education, lack of employment opportunities, and lack of an independent political voice. So the Declaration of Sentiments was a really important document. It was calling out a lot of what was wrong in the day, some of which, kind of continues on in various forms, but really, shining a spotlight on some of the inequities that existed and making a demand for women's suffrage. And it really created the agenda for women's activism throughout the suffrage movement. So as the work starts to get off the ground and really get underway, the first National Women's Rights Convention was held in Worcester, Massachusetts in 1850, and it was attended by many key figures in the suffrage and abolitionist movements. And by abolitionist, for those that may not be familiar, it refers to the fight to abolish slavery. So there was a coming together of these two movements, and we see a lot of famous abolitionists, a lot of famous suffragists, people that worked in both realms attend this convention, including Frederick Douglass, Paulina Wright Davis, Abby Kelly Foster, William Lloyd Garrison, Lucy Stone, Sojourner Truth, Susan B. Anthony, and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. So an alliance was formed between these two movements, and the American Equal Rights Association was formed as a result to kind of represent that combined effort. And this was in 1866, and this group was intended to focus on suffrage for all, regardless of race or gender. But unfortunately, politics and some negative racial issues and a lot of complications occurred and kind of got in the way. And cracks began to appear in the alliance by 1869, just a few years later. And it really threw the American Equal Rights Association kind of into disarray over the 15th Amendment, which was the amendment to the Constitution that granted Black men the right to vote, but it didn't address the women's right to vote. So as a result, Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton formed the National Women's Suffrage Association. And they dedicate this organization to fighting for women's rights to vote through a constitutional amendment. Simultaneous to this, there was the formation of another organization, which was called the American Women's Suffrage Association, and it was dedicated to fighting for women's right to vote through the amendment of individual state constitutions. So it was really kind of a two-pronged approach that was happening, an attempt to secure rights in the states through state constitution amendments, and an attempt to guarantee women's rights to vote nationally through the amendment of the US Constitution. So then the 15th Amendment, which abolished slavery, which granted Black men the right to vote, was ratified in 1870. And the National Women's Suffrage Association had refused to work for its ratification by the states. Instead, they felt like they needed to focus their efforts on what they hoped would be a 16th Amendment that would require universal suffrage, meaning that everyone could vote regardless of race or gender. This decision caused Frederick Douglass, the famous abolitionist, to end his collaboration with Stanton and Anthony. And there were other factors that played into the tensions between the white suffragists and suffragists of color. Unfortunately, white suffragists were not as inclusive of women of color as they should have been, partially out of concerns over alienating Southern politicians whose support for women's suffrage really was needed. So there were a lot of political considerations that came into play, and as I mentioned, some unfortunate racial issues as well. So it really did kind of lead to a division and led to the groups kind of working both sides working toward the goal of women securing the right to vote, just not in a really unified way as much as we might have hoped. And then in 1878, there was a women's suffrage amendment proposed in the US Congress, which failed. But it's interesting to note because when the 19th Amendment finally does get passed 41 years later, it's worded exactly the same as that 1878 amendment. So I just think that's an interesting point in the sense that, the goal was always there. It was really the political will that caused this 40+ year delay. You know, there was a lot of mindset change that needed to happen, a lot of coalition building, a lot of, you know, just change in the political climate to make passage of women's suffrage really possible. But the language and the goal was there. So just sort of an interesting point along the way. And then as we jump ahead a little bit to 1890, the National Women's Suffrage Association and the American Women's Suffrage Association merged. These are the two groups that have taken, one's focused on the women's right to vote at a national level, US constitutional amendment, and the other is focused on the amendment of state constitutions. They merge and form the National American Women's Suffrage Association, which is focused on securing suffrage at the state level. And we do start to see state level progress beginning to occur. One of the first notable events to really illustrate this point was that Wyoming was admitted to the Union with a state constitution that granted women's suffrage way back in 1890. So at the time they became a part of the United States, when they were admitted as a state, their constitution was already providing for this right. So something really notable and to be proud of. It's also around this time that we start to see public opinion shifting a bit, and there ends up being some growing support for women's suffrage. And by 1893, that's starting to filter out into a few more states, with Colorado becoming the first state to adopt women's suffrage. So Colorado was already admitted to the Union at this time, and officially became the first state to adopt suffrage. So something for all of us here in Colorado to be proud of. And then this forward movement is followed by the adoption of women's suffrage in Idaho, and Utah joining the Union with full suffrage for women in 1896. And then we're also in 1896 starting to see you know, some formality and a big push from women of color who are really you know, waging their own battle for women's suffrage with the formation of the National Association of Colored Women's Clubs, which were really focused on the rights of women and children. This organization was formed by Mary Church Terrell, Ida B. Wells, and Frances E.W. Harper. So we're seeing a lot of organizing, and it's paying off. We're seeing some states you know, adopt suffrage, and we're seeing the political climate start to shift. And then by 1914, we have Washington, California, Oregon, Kansas, and Arizona all adopt women's suffrage, followed by New York in 1917, and Michigan, South Dakota, and Oklahoma in 1918. So progress is definitely underway. And it's also at this time that, you know, because of the changing political climate and public opinion surrounding women's right to vote, we're starting to see more of a push at the national level too. We're just starting to see, you know, a different tenor in the, I guess, you know, acceptance of women voting. In 1913, there was a large-scale parade for women's suffrage that took place on Pennsylvania Avenue in front of the White House on the eve of Woodrow Wilson's inauguration. And by 1916, President Wilson announced that the Democratic Party platform will support suffrage. So we're seeing forward movements at the national level now as well, making the odds of a constitutional amendment more possible than it had been. So we're seeing a lot of progress. They're getting very close. Then in 1918, the US House votes to pass the suffrage amendment, but the measure does fall short in the Senate. It isn't until the following year in 1919 that the 19th Amendment is finally passed by the US Senate and the ratification process begins. And by that, we mean the process for state approval of the constitutional amendment. And I'll talk about that just a bit more in a second here. But that all brings us to August 26, 1920, when the 19th Amendment was ratified by 3/4 of the state legislatures, and women finally win full voting rights. So as far as the amendment process is concerned, and we talk about the amendment needing to be ratified, I want to say a little bit about that, because I think to appreciate how difficult the fight for women's suffrage actually was, it's important to understand the process for amending the US Constitution, which is something that has happened rarely. It's only been done successfully 27 times in the history of our country. It's not an easy thing to do. So in order for this to happen, there's several steps before we can declare, that we've reached our goal. First, the proposed language needs to be approved by a 2/3 vote of both houses of Congress, the U.S. House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate. And in itself, that's not an easy thing to accomplish. But once that does happen, the National Archivist will then send notification and materials to each state governor so the states can start considering whether or not they will approve the language. The ratification of the amendment language must be adopted by 3/4 of the state legislatures, and it can't be amended in any way. So they've got to take the language exactly as it's presented to them and either approve it or not. The official count for the number of states that do approve is kept by the Office of the Federal Register at the National Archives. And then when the number of required states needed to ratify a proposed amendment is met, the Archivist of the United States proclaims it as a new amendment to the Constitution. And that takes us to the 19th Amendment, which we have and celebrate today. And you can see it's really simple. The language of it is, brief and, it's not complex. It states that the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. So it wasn't, a convoluted or complex thing, really. It really was just getting the political will behind it, trying to change societal norms, views about what the role of women in politics and the public sphere should be. So there just needed to be a lot of change in mindset, really, to finally get to this point and, see this amendment enacted. And I think as we reach this important anniversary, it's always important and kind of nice to take a look back. Today, I think we can be thankful for the bravery and the persistence of so many activists that really did work tirelessly to secure the right of women to vote. And I think it's important that we appreciate the difficulty of this fight as we try and build upon the progress that they achieved. I think we all know that, in many realms, there's a lot of work that remains to be done today. So as we continue to work towards a more equal and just society for not only women, but communities of color, immigrants, marginalized groups, many others, really our most fundamental responsibility and tool as a citizen for affecting change is exercising our right to vote. So with that, I just want to say, as you all approach voting age, become eligible to vote, just an urge and a reminder to make sure you are registered and never let an election pass without making sure that your voice is heard. And I think that's all I have on that. I forgot my resources at the end. I had referenced them earlier on. These will all give you a little bit more information if you're interested in digging in more deeply. It's, a lot of interesting people. This movement wouldn't have happened without them, and a lot of wonderful life stories to be told, and more on the dynamics of the political climate and just the overall process. So I would certainly encourage you to dig in if that's something that interests you further.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Andrea. That was very interesting. I appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. And
now
stop sharing my screen. Is that?
Yeah. Now, if I believe I am correct, I will shift things over to Beth Barela, who is the Executive Director of the Colorado Women's Hall of Fame. So she will share her screen and take it away, Beth.
Thank you so much. Now let me get back. I did a quick update earlier on this slideshow, and I want to get back to the beginning of it. Sorry about that. Shoot. At one point I was ready. I'm really glad to be here today. and get to talk to you about the Colorado women suffragists. We have quite a few guest stars here today. So I'm also going to introduce our founder, one of our inductees, and at the end, some of our board members. So we're all really excited to do this with you. Who is the Colorado Women's Hall of Fame? Well, it was founded by M.L. Hanson, who will be talking to you in a second. It's grounded in the historical roots of our inductees. We have 172 inductees, all Colorado women. It's nourished by the leadership of our volunteer board of directors and grows through the strength of all of our supporters, donors, friends, families, and past board members. I'd like M.L. Hanson, who is on the call, to talk a little bit about founding it. ML is our founder among so many other accomplishments. She's been a businesswoman, including a vice president in banking. She's led a number of nonprofits. She's been an entrepreneur, and she currently is the leader of Board Bound for the Women's Leadership Foundation. Unmute.
Thank you, Beth. It really is a pleasure to be here. I'm a former Girl Scout, and just to take a second to tell you about what I remember of the first voting time. It was at a time when you had to be 21 in order to vote, and the first time that I tried to vote, I was actually in transit, and I was moving from Washington State to Pennsylvania. And because of the registration difficulties and having my birthday and whatever, I actually missed out on my first date to be able to vote. But I don't think I've ever missed an election since then. And I certainly echo what we all care about, and that is making sure that our voices are heard. So I was asked to talk a little bit today about why we started the Colorado Women's Hall of Fame. And I think it's important to think about the historical context of this. And I know you got a tremendous, rich amount of history from the prior presenter. I'm going to talk more about what was going on in the 1970s and 1980s. And the world was changing quite a bit. And again, it was almost like another second or third revolution of the women's movement, in that all of a sudden, a lot of women were no longer just working at home. And they weren't just nurses, and they just weren't teachers, which are two very honorable and important professions. But it used to be that married women stayed at home to take care of the kids. And that just wasn't the case anymore. So more and more women were pouring into the workforce. And many of us, as Beth has indicated, were like the first woman to hold many of those jobs that we had. And there were some barriers to break. And so that was kind of what was going on at the time. I was the state president of Business and Professional Women, and went to a legislative conference and found out from that group that there just weren't a lot of acknowledgments for women. And I came back to Colorado and had something very personal happen to me. One of my very closest friends' daughters was trying to write a paper, and she wanted to write it about a woman who'd been a leader. And she went to the library and she talked to her teachers, and there wasn't any information available, which meant that women's great accomplishments were not even included in their education. And that girl has since gone on, by the way, to be a grown woman, an engineer, and an adoptive parent. But she had this urge to learn more about women's leadership. So that influenced me personally. And I wanted to convene a group of women, which I did, and say, how can we acknowledge women? We weren't at the time even thinking completely about writing women into history, but that became a core value for us. And I really felt quite strongly that the history of Colorado, of our culture itself in Colorado, had not been represented completely because half of the women were left out, half of the population rather were left out. And so it was not at all complete or inclusive. So when we started the Colorado Women's Hall of Fame, what became the Colorado Women's Hall of Fame, it was really to provide girls and women with hope an inspiration so that they could aspire to do more than maybe they thought they could, and that we would lift up these role models by telling their stories and being able to have girls in schools and girls in Girl Scouts and throughout their various organizations, be able to seek out these stories to act as motivation for them and to give them a real can-do attitude for their accomplishments. And so that's primarily why we continued to strive to write women into history. And that way we also believe that it's not only helped educationally, but that we have been able to provide some motivation for women to go into many, many different roles and break out of a lot of the traditional roles and really become pioneers. And the Hall honors those pioneering women by induction every 2 years, and I'm sure Beth will talk about that more. So look us up sometime and you'll have a chance to read a lot more about these women today. And I would just challenge you, find a heroine, because we've got a lot of them out there. Thank you.
Thank you, ML. You're just a great straight person for the rest of these slides. So thanks to ML and many board members since then, we now have 172 inductees in our Hall of Fame. Every other year, we add 10 new inductees, 4 historical and 6 contemporary, 6 women that are still living, still changing Colorado. And you'll look, when you look at our website, you'll see you can find inductees in every single career choice you would ever want. So please, if you're looking for a role model, please come to our website. If you're looking to write a paper, please come to our website. As ML said, our vision is to inspire by celebrating and sharing the enduring contributions of Colorado's extraordinary women. Among you are extraordinary women. On this call are extraordinary women. Our mission is dedicated to recognizing and preserving the history of these accomplishments, both past and present. And our goal is to educate the people of Colorado about the stories of the women who shaped our state and the nation's history, and in some cases, international history, with courage, leadership, intelligence, compassion, and creativity. Why do we do this? Well, we want to add her story to history. History is traditionally really written about men, and men deserve to be written about. So do women. So in order to inspire our daughters, our granddaughters, and all of the girls of Colorado, they too can be whoever they want to be, we've created, built, and maintain the Colorado Women's Hall of Fame. I wanted to, I was supposed to mention when I first voted. I first voted in 1962. It wasn't a presidential election, but it was an election for the governor. I don't remember what amendments were on. I still have trouble working through all the amendments that we get to vote on. I have to study hard before I do that. But at that point, I voted for John Love, and he eventually became governor of Colorado. So that's a long time ago. Now I want to talk just a little intro about our Colorado suffragist history. And I love this map because it really helps you recognize that it's the women of the West who started and made a lot of progress early on with the suffrage movement. You'll see Wyoming there it wasn't even a state yet. Wyoming was only a territory when it voted for women to be able to vote in 1869. Colorado was the first state, the first territory that had become a state that allowed women to vote in 1893. And then you'll see surrounding us, we got a few other states to ratify the vote. Most of the West had ratified before the Midwest got involved, and the East got involved. And there were many states still when the 19th Amendment was passed, there were many states that still had not allowed women to vote. So I'm very proud to be a Colorado. I'm a native Coloradan, by the way. Now I want to introduce Jill Tietjen. She is one of our inductees, first of all. And on top of that, she's just a woman really that has a rich, rich life. She started out as an engineer, and she broke a number of barriers in women engineering. And I'm not going to say when it started because I can't remember exactly, but for a while, she was a boundary breaker for us for sure. And on top of that, she went on then to write a number of books, including a book called Her Story, Hollywood Her Story, and a number of other publications involving STEM and engineering. So Jill is going to explain our Google Arts and Culture, and the reason she's going to do that, because all the other things she does, she also curates our Colorado Women's Hall of Fame Google Arts and Culture exhibits. Jill, please lead us.
Well, thank you so much, Beth. And as for my voting, the voting age when ML voted was 21. And the voting age changed in 1971 to 18. I didn't turn 18 until after the presidential election in 1972. Born in 1954, the presidential election in 1972 was in November. I turned 18 in December. And so what I remember was being in college, and everybody, I was a freshman in college, and everybody was getting ready to vote but me, because I was too young to vote. So also I want to say that I'm a lifetime Girl Scout. I was chair of the board of Girl Scouts Mile High Council, and I'm also a woman of distinction. And I mean, my heart is in Girl Scouts. Google Arts and Culture has provided an opportunity which was way important before March of 2020, but then became critical in March of 2020. And that was to provide the opportunity for organizations and museums to put exhibits online, to have virtual exhibits. And I've been working with Google Arts and Cultures since my years affiliated with the National Women's Hall of Fame, which is in Seneca Falls in New York, right next door, basically, to the Women's Rights National Historical Park, where the ranger patch comes from. And I decided I was going to do the same thing for the Colorado Women's Hall of Fame. So this exhibit is 100 years of women's suffrage in honor of exactly what we're talking about today, but focusing on Colorado women. So let's go, Beth, to the next one. We already heard Colorado enfranchised women in 1893, the first state to do so. And we're just going to blaze through these so that we have time to get to the scavenger hunt. Julia Archibald Holmes, the bloomer girl on Pikes Peak, who climbed Pikes Peak as a public statement for women's equality. Next is Dr. Alida Avery, who was a doctor practicing medicine, who also worked for women's suffrage. Next is Caroline Nichols Churchill. She had her own weekly newspaper, the Queen Bee, credited as the first emancipation newspaper, with the highest circulation for any weekly between Kansas City and San Francisco. Baby Doe Tabor, who donated office space for suffrage. Ellis Meredith, the next one, who was called the Susan B. Anthony of Colorado, who said when she went back east, if Colorado goes for women's suffrage, you may count on a landslide in that direction throughout the West. Elizabeth Ensley, whose leadership was instrumental in voting rights for women and who dedicated her career to women's rights, ensuring that African-American women got the right to vote. That's okay, it's fine.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
Next is Louis Croft Boyd, a nurse who wrote about suffrage as a teenager. Next is Sarah Blatt Decker. She was widowed 3 times, and she lost all of her property to her husband's family because women had no legal rights, and she decided that was wrong and she was going to fix it. Eliza Rout. Oh, this is, I guess this is 1893. Yeah, women get the right to vote. Then Eliza Rout, president of the City League of Denver, Colorado's first lady and the first woman to register to vote in Colorado. Next, the unsinkable Molly Brown, who was on the Titanic. That was really, that's what she's famous for, but really what she did was amazing in helping in the suffrage movement. Next is Caroline Spencer, who was a doctor, but who was horrified that women weren't equal politically and economically and felt that suffrage was the way to go and dedicated herself to suffrage. Next is Hazel Schmall, who taught at Vassar. She was a botanist. There's even a plant named for her, and she promoted suffrage. Next, yes, the women of Colorado, once they got the right to vote, they helped women get the right to vote nationally because they proved, just like we've proved, that you can do mail-in voting, mail votes. So the women here were very active nationally. And then I think next is Helen Ring Robinson. She was the first woman elected to the Colorado State Senate, and she actually went across the country and advocated. And then Elizabeth Betty Pellet, who is next, was also active for the 19th Amendment. And so the next one, the last one, I think, this is signing the 19th Amendment. 2 things I want to say about that. August 26th is Equality Day. That's the day that women got the right to vote. And for those of you that are interested, there was a real, oh my goodness, there was a huge battle in Tennessee, the last state to ratify by the way, the margin was 1 vote for Tennessee to ratify for women to get the right to vote. The suffrage movement, their flower is yellow roses, like the colors that you saw from the League of Women Voters presentation. And the anti-suffrage movement, their flower was red roses. I always now give yellow roses to all of my friends. I think we're done, Beth.
Thank you, Jill. That was wonderful. As you can tell, we had many, many women of Colorado that were fighting this battle. And as Andrea said earlier, the battle went on for 80 years. Yeah, 80 years. So things don't come easy necessarily, but good things are meant to happen. The next part of our activity, we are going to do a breakout session. And what we're going to do is hear from each of you, hear from several of you. We won't have time probably to hear from each of you, but to hear from several of you who have looked at the scavenger hunt, so we can talk about your favorite question on that scavenger hunt and hopefully your favorite answer. Which woman spoke most loudly to you?
Great. Okay, so I'm just actually going.
Andrea said the 19th Amendment was very simple. It just said it said the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. So that was passed in 1920. I want to share with you that that didn't mean all women had the right to vote as of 1920. There were various other laws and guidelines that were going on, as well as activities going on across the country that prevented women from the right to vote. Native American tribes had to sign a treaty with the United States before they were given the right to vote. And the last treaty was signed in 1924. Asian citizens were not given the right to vote until 1952. And then in 1964, the Civil Rights Act was enacted primarily so that many of the practices in some of the southern states of the United States had to change so that they would not discriminate against Blacks and keep them from voting. And then it was not until 1975 that Congress extended the Voting Rights Act to include protection for language, minority citizens, and for the disabled. So we are still in the process of expanding our rights within the United States and women's right to vote. I wanted to share this beautiful print with you, and it was created by Adri Norris, and I've included her website because if you go to her website, you are going to learn all about women as well as get to see her beautiful artwork. So I want to put in a little advertisement for Adri. She's an amazing woman. And then I do want to say that we are eternally grateful to the women before us who fought for our rights. And we have a couple of board members on this session that I want to acknowledge. And one is Peg McKechnie. And Peg wanted me to tell you that she was also a Girl Scout. So you continue on in those amazing skills that were read earlier. And another board member on this meeting is Marie Williams, and I want to thank her for her help in our breakout session. Marie is not only a new board member to the Colorado Women's Hall of Fame, she's an MCC representative to the Girl Scouts board and a troop leader. So thank you both for joining us. And I want to thank you all for letting us participate in this. And you can all order your Girl Scout, your Colorado Women's Inspire Colorado Women's Hall of Fame fun patch after this. So I will stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Beth. I'm going to invite Beth Hendrix to unmute herself and talk a little bit about kind of what we can do today and how the League of Women Voters can help us out.
Thank you. So as Amy said, I'm Beth Hendrix. I'm the Executive Director of the League of Women Voters of Colorado. Andrea explained our founding by the original suffragists who fought for women to have the right to vote in the United States. And when it was clear that the 19th Amendment would be ratified and made a part of our Constitution, suffragists formed the League of Women Voters to educate these 20 million new voters on this important responsibility. How to be informed about issues and candidates on the ballot, how to lobby or ask our government for what is important to you, and how to run for office. Today, the League of Women Voters continues to promote informed and active participation in government by women and men to ensure that our democracy and government operate effectively, and to fight for the development of law and policy that reflects our beliefs as an organization. Our mission is simple: empowering voters, defending democracy. Because our founders and hundreds of people before them fought for the right to vote, the League believes that every person who has the right to vote should vote, and that every voter should be informed and therefore confident in their voting. Have you ever gone into a test not really ready? And so you're not confident, you're nervous, and you're unsure and even scared? The League works to make sure that no voter feels that way when they're filling out their ballot. The League also tells our government about laws that need changing to make them more fair, or laws that need to be created. This is called lobbying. The first law that the League lobbied for was called the Cable Act. In 1920, a woman who married a man who was a citizen of another country automatically lost her US citizenship, even if the couple lived here in the United States. The Cable Act changed that, and League members lobbied their elected officials to pass that law. The League still lobbies for new laws or changes to existing laws to make things more fair for people. Another example is Colorado's mail-in ballots. We're one of only 5 states in the United States that have all mail-in ballots, which makes voting an awful lot easier, especially if you can't get off work to go to a polling place, or if you don't have a car, or if you have a disability that makes it tough to get around. The League fought hard for mail-in ballots, and now, especially in this COVID pandemic, our election systems are a model for the 45 states that don't have mail-in ballots. So I encourage you to vote as soon as you're old enough. Don't let an election go by without letting your voice be heard and your opinion known, because your voice matters and your vote counts. Go to the website vote411.org for all the information you need to vote and be an informed voter. Encourage everyone you know to vote, because your city, your state, and our country will be better for it. 100 years ago, we didn't have that right as women, and now we do. So we're depending on you to use it. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Beth. That was really, truly inspiring. So now we have just about 5 or 6 minutes left, but I think if we have a lot of questions and our presenters are able to stay on, I think maybe we can go a little bit over just so we can make sure that everyone has a chance to ask their questions. So I'm going to open up the chat box now so that anything you enter, all of us will be able to see. So girls, please feel free to enter your questions into the chat box and our experts will take a stab at answering them. And maybe I'll go ahead and get started, and any of our experts can answer. You all should be able to unmute yourselves. Can you explain to us a little bit about why maybe some people would be opposed to giving women the right to vote?
All right.
It's hard. Oh, you go ahead, Beth.
All right.
Oh, Jill, you go ahead.
Let Beth go.
Well, I was just going to say it's hard for me to imagine in this day and age why anybody would feel that way. But as I read about history and as I understand history, we have come a long ways. And men believed they had the right and they were more intelligent and knew what was right for the country and for their women. I think we've evolved. Jill, what did you want to say?
What I was going to say was English common law was the basis of which most of the United States was founded. And under English common law, women are property. They are not people. And so there was a belief that if women were educated, which was one of the grievances in the Declaration of Sentiments in 1848, that women didn't have the right to an education, there was a belief that if women were educated and tried to do anything in addition to having children, that they would actually damage their reproductive systems. And so there are some very long-standing prejudices against women's intelligence and women's capabilities, which goes back to why there was a group of people who thought that women shouldn't have the right to vote.
And I'd like to add that there are still people who believe that equity and equality is somehow like a pie. And if we cut the slices smaller, people get less. And that's not true with equity and equality. We all get more.
And I would just like to add on one quick thought to that as well, kind of picking up on the first Beth's comment about, we've evolved as a society, we've made progress, which we have, and, that's something to be very thankful for. But I do think that we need to remain pretty vigilant about it. I have, in recent times, heard some questioning about, why the focus on women's rights, women aren't discriminated against, that sort of thing. And so I think that there can be a belief that we've solved the problem, and it's really not true. We've made a ton of progress for sure, but there are still problems in society. There are still things that need to be addressed in all kinds of areas. And so I think it's just something that we need to remain very vigilant about and really dedicate ourselves to combating it wherever we see it.
Well, thank you all for those very thoughtful answers. Okay, so anyone can please feel free to enter any questions for our presenters into the chat box. I'm not seeing any others come in. I will take the time right now to mention that in our follow-up email, we will also include a link to all the answers for the scavenger hunt. So if you weren't able to go through all of them in the breakout session, or you want to keep exploring on your own, you'll have the answers available. So I actually don't see any other questions coming in, and we are coming up against 5:30 here. So maybe I'll give our presenters a chance if there's anything else you'd like to mention to the Girl Scouts we have joining us. Please, if there's anything else you'd like us to know, please unmute yourselves and help us wrap things up.
We were hoping to get the girls' insights on what were the most important parts of this presentation, since we're going to be giving it to younger girls on Friday. We really want to hit the parts that you believe 2 to 3 to 4 years ago, when you were their age, would have been the most meaningful to you.
Yeah, so Beth, as Beth was saying, if anyone could please, we are doing a session similar for younger girls on Friday. So if there's anything that you would have liked to learn about the women's suffrage movement when you were a Daisy, Brownie, or a junior, please enter it into the chat box. And I see Taylor asked in the scavenger hunt, what was the name of the mountain climbing woman's name? And I believe Jill Tietjen answered in the chat box, Julia Archibald Holmes. All right, so what would you like to have known about the women's suffrage movement when you were a younger Girl Scout? Please enter it into the chat box. We would love to hear your advice for us. So I'll let girls enter anything about that in their advice for us into the chat box, but if any of our other presenters have anything else to add, please feel free to go ahead.
Only that I was a Girl Scout.
You were, Beth. I didn't know that. We've been doing some other virtual sessions, and I've always been asking our experts, what is your favorite Girl Scout cookie?
Thin Mint.
Yeah. Thin Mints, thumbs down.
I am a fan of trefoils as well.
My husband loves trefoils.
I'm now also into when I could eat them, I can't anymore. Tagalongs, and then my husband loves the Samoas.
And I just want to add that I'm actually a Girl Scout leader, and unfortunately timing and schedules didn't work out for my troop members to be here, but we do plan to do one of our first meetings of the year focused on this very topic. And I appreciate the opportunity to participate in this, because there's so much great information that I intend to share with them and just make them aware of this really important topic. But yeah, Girl Scouts is a fantastic organization, and I'm really happy to see the participation by older girls, because I think you can do so many amazing things through Girl Scouts. So great job, and keep at it.
Well, I see some wonderful tips coming in. Knowing what made these historical women courageous to work and fight for the right to vote. The fact that women in the past were influential and were not just housewives, but they wanted jobs, they were doctors, they had identities, and they gathered people for protests. That was very inspiring. For younger girls to have our presenters all speak about their Girl Scout experience a little bit, what they were like as girls and what they learned and the things that they worked on. And that somebody else would like to have learned more about the work the women in Colorado did that made a big difference, and why women didn't have the right to vote is important for girls to understand, and why they didn't have the right to vote would help them understand why historical women were so passionate about it. It's mind-blowing to some other younger girls that there were Girl Scouts before they even existed. I love that. And why these women were such a big part of history and to make it fun. So thank you all to all the Girl Scouts who joined us and for your fabulous advice. I'm going to take the time to go through this and put together some notes for us. Thank you to all of our amazing presenters for taking the time out of your day as well to talk to us about this. I know I learned a lot today. I hope you all did as well. Keep an eye out for a follow-up email with some links and some resources for how you can continue learning more. Encourage, if you know any younger girls who are interested in learning about this important topic, have them sign up to participate with us on Friday. We will also post that session online as well so that girls can continue learning about the women's suffrage movement. So thank you all so much. I hope you had a great afternoon. I know I did. And we'll close things out. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you.